The Sony PlayStation 2, the best-selling video game console in the world. Apparently 155 million of these things have been sold. Despite these sales successes, of course not everybody owned or has played one before, so if you've never experienced this great console before, it might be a good time to buy one for yourself. When it comes to video games or anything that is popular, it's easy to bring out your inner hipster and say, ugh, GameCube, Dreamcast, Xbox is better because rarer. But I don't support that line of thinking because I'm not a child. The PS2 was successful because it was simple. It had many great games. Online play was free, usually. It was backwards compatible with PS1 games, and you could play DVDs. The last point is very important. There have been terrible attempts at multimedia gaming consoles that had failed miserably, like the Panasonic 3DO or the Philips CDI. Thanks for those Zelda games, that's what we wanted. The best thing about the CDI is that it gave us these meme-spec cutscenes. In 2000, when this console was released, DVDs were a new thing. Instead of picking up a dedicated DVD player, many bought a PS2 instead. And why not? The kids get something to play with. But it was still of use to parents who were not gamers because they could watch movies on it. I think that's why Sony made those UMD movies for the PSP. They probably figured they could replicate the same sort of success with a handheld device. But that's all in the past now. Having a very long production run, the console is now discontinued. Its discontinuation has left us with many great, mostly cheap games, and a couple of different hardware revisions. Of all the consoles I see in pawn shops, the PS2 is one of the most plentiful. There's always at least one, and prices can be anywhere from $20 to $70, depending on the condition and if it comes with, games or accessories or whatever. At least from what I've seen lately. In terms of hardware, you get two major revisions, though there were incremental revisions in order to stop people from modding the consoles. The first PS2 looked like this. We know this as the fat PS2. Ooh, it can stand vertically. I don't think any other console at the time was stand-uppable. These fat PS2s didn't have an Ethernet port, but the functionality could be added on with a network adapter. The adapter also made it possible to add a hard drive. There was only one game, Final Fantasy XI, that absolutely needed the hard drive, but there were other games that installed portions of the game onto the drive to reduce loading times. SOCOM games even had DLC. Nowadays, there are people who mod the console in order to be able to launch games directly from the hard drive without having to put in a disc. The Slimline model replaced the fat PS2 in 2004. This is what I have, and it is my first home console. I grew up playing PC games when I was a kid, so having a dedicated gaming console was new and exciting for me. The funny thing is I got this just after the PS3 was released, but I didn't care. I figured this was a good opportunity to try games that weren't available for the PC. One of the first games I got was Disgaea, which actually led to the creation of this channel. As you can see, it is much smaller than the original PlayStation 2. The Slim had a disk drive door, whereas the older model had something more akin to an optical drive on a PC. I like this redesign because it's much easier to keep the discs scratch-free. An Ethernet port is now included, rejoice, but for the sake of becoming slimmer, the hard drive had to go. Not a big deal for most people, but the Japanese had a lot of games that actually took advantage of the installing feature and all that, so that's kind of unfortunate for them. It's kind of crazy to think how small the console became though. It's so thin, nothing in my collection other than this PlayStation TV is smaller or lighter. Eventually, this power adapter even became integrated into the case somehow. I guess at the time the hardware was getting old, so making everything smaller and smaller was easier as time went on. Mine is modded so the console thinks that the door is closed, the disc door I mean, even if it isn't. This way I can use swap magic and play burnt discs. No mod chips needed here. It's been a few years since I did it, but there is like a piece of plastics holding something down and something else that is soldered as well. That's the problem when it comes to modding PS2s. There are so many hardware revisions within, the fat and the slim revisions that each one of them requires a bit of a different approach depending on what you want to do. But I think that actually could be its own video now that I think about it. An interesting fact about the PlayStation 2 is that it could output in 1080i if you play Gran Turismo 4 and you use a component cable. This is also one of the first consoles to have the ability to switch between 4:3 and 16:9 aspect ratios, though not all games supported that option. In terms of games, everything you can think of is available. First-person shooters, Gran Turismo 3 and 4, Kingdom Hearts, Disgaea 1 and 2, Okami, Grimoire, Odin Sphere, Final Fantasy X and 10-2, Ico, I think it's pronounced Ico, not ICO, and Shadow of the Colossus, GTA. You know, the list is pretty much endless when it comes to that. Even though some games ended up being ported to newer consoles, there are plenty of great games only found on the PS2. So I think it's actually worth it to do a little bit of research on that and see what's available. That is also worth an entire video, I think, the topic about what kind of PS2 games are out there. At the end of its life, it was quite obvious that the PS2 couldn't compete with the Xbox or PC in terms of processing power, so some cross-platform games had inferior PS2 versions. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory comes to mind. The best was the PC version, which I actually have myself, with the Xbox looking worse, but the PS2 game had even had like different level design. I was kind of shocked to see how different it was. So that's something to keep in mind if you're, picky about having the best game, the best version of a particular game. But yeah, that is the Sony PlayStation 2. If you've never owned one before, then now would be a good time to start picking one up, I think. There's so much stuff for the PS2, not just games, but accessories too, like this camera thing. But I saved the best for last. You can change the orientation of the PlayStation logo from horizontal to vertical. And this was before orientation lock was even a thing. Very ahead of its time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.